Well, I do love Richmond. In fact, my wife and I come down here at least once per year. You have a fabulous art museum. Can't wait to see the new Contemporary Institute. Great restaurants. And so we've been coming here for years. So in spite of the fact that wiped out 2 tires, that I haven't popped a tire in 40 years. But life is pretty easy for us, as you probably know, because the tow truck shows up in 20 minutes, takes us to the Audi dealer, and we get a loaner, and we're here. We're like 30 minutes late for being here, so it's not a big deal these days. And by the way, that car, and that fits in with what we're talking about, that car is, we've had that car for 18 months, and this trip we just pushed over 4,000 miles. Because we live in a walkable urban place, and so we don't really need it that much. And this is, back 20 years ago, when I was running Robert Charles Lesser and Company, that we were the specialists in a master plan of communities. We worked on Brandon Mill starting back in the 1970s. And the company, again, which I sold, works on more master plan communities than anybody. So I was like all the rest of you back in the 80s and 90s. We were doing drivable, suburban kinds of product. That's what the market wanted, and that's what they got. Well, the market's changed. And that's what today is about, because you're seeing a rebirth in Richmond of walkable urbanism. And hopefully by the time you leave this afternoon, you'll understand that this is no longer just a niche market for strange people that want to walk to work and they want to walk to restaurants. But we found in many markets, it is the market. And what you have right now in Richmond is, of course, a great opportunity because of the bus rapid transit that's just about to open. And I've actually been involved working with your mayor, working with your city council and planning people on that 15-station BRT line. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So the big question to you is, are you going to take advantage of that $65 million gift that the feds and the state of Virginia gave you? Because you only have $8 million in that deal. So first to understand is the role of transportation in the built environment, that we in urbanism understand, and that by far transportation of the 16 infrastructure categories, transportation is first among equals. In fact, it drives development. It drives where the market's going. And by the way, just so you know about what we're talking about as far as the size of real estate development and all the infrastructure that supports it, it's a mere 35% of the wealth of the country. It's the largest asset class. If you took all if you took the capitalized value of all the NASDAQ and all the New York Stock Exchange companies and doubled it, real estate's bigger. That's also, by the way, why we in real estate are very proud of the fact that of the last 3 recessions, we caused 2 of them. And I think you'll understand that we really did it up really well this last time. But so transportation drives development, and the transportation system that we the people select dictates the form of that built environment. So for the last 50, 60 years, we built, obviously, freeways for cars and trucks. And we disinvested in all forms of transit. And for that, we got drivable suburban development. What drivable, that there are only 2 ways to build the built environment: drivable suburban and walkable urban. That's it. And drivable suburban is very low density, and all the different product types, residential, retail, office, industrial, are separate from one another at super low densities. And the only way to get around between those buildings is by cars and trucks. The other is walkable urban. And that means that we need multiple transportation options. That you basically need a portfolio of transportation options. Cars and trucks, of course, but transit, biking's really important, and of course, walkability. And once you get to a walkable urban place, everything's walkable. That means it's very high density. It's 5 to 40 times more dense than drivable suburban. And once you're there, it's walkable. What that means is that we, for 6,000 years, have only wanted to walk about 3,000 feet, about a half mile. So going back to your high school geometry, pi r squared, these walkable urban places are anywhere from 100 to 500 acres in size. That's 3 or 4 times larger than a regional mall, including its parking lot. And those walkable urban places basically have they have a governor on how big they can get, because it's how far we want to walk. So 2 ways of building, 2 different infrastructure investments to create those 2 different ways. So there's a corollary to that transportation drives development. The corollary is that we don't build transportation systems to move people and goods. That's not why we build them. That we build transportation systems for economic growth. That's the goal. The means is by moving people and goods. So every time that you invest in your transportation system, the question is, what economic good will it achieve? And we're not asking that question. And as a result, we're confusing ends and means, and we're making a lot of boneheaded decisions and a lot of multi-billion-dollar mistakes. So coming back to why we built drivable suburbanism. Well, one of the reasons is that the building of that machine 50 years ago was where about 45% of all jobs, directly and indirectly, originated. It's the raw material that went into the manufacturing of, the sales and servicing, the insuring, the financing, the fueling, the entire petroleum business, and building the roads for the automobile. So if you remember, you gray hairs out there, you may remember that GM or Chevy had that tune, "See the Chevrolet," or "See the USA in your Chevrolet." Well, as you were seeing the USA in your Chevrolet, you were becoming wealthier. It only made sense to build drivable suburban places that forced us all to drive, because it was creating wealth in this country. And we wanted it, of course, great market demand for it, because we had just invented drivable suburban 100 years ago. So great pent-up demand, and it made us wealthy. What's not to like? So up until 100 years ago, all we built was walkable urban. Look at the Fan in Richmond. That's all walkable urban. That was all built 100 years ago and before. Well, after the Second World War, we pushed that pendulum all the way over, and all we built was drivable suburban. And we disinvested in our cities. So this is how we laid it out throughout the country. We first started, we learned how to build freeways from the Germans. Eisenhower came back with that notion. And we invented subdivisions. And we then figured out how to build regional malls. This is King of Prussia Mall outside of Philadelphia, which is where I grew up. When my mother took me to the King of Prussia Mall in our car, driving on the freeways to this one-of-a-kind regional mall, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. I thought this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And we also moved, of course, our businesses out there. We invented business parks. Well, we've gotten much better at building freeways, and this is from the capital of freeway construction in this country, where I was last week, Texas. And we've just continued to push the boundaries out, because we have a lot of land. For every 1% population growth in the late 20th century, we expanded our land mass by 6 to 8%, otherwise known as sprawl. And what we've done is that we would go out to that next ring, that next edge city, which was a transitory word, and we'd use it use it up, throw it away, and move further out. But we had lots of land. So we used it, threw it away, kept on moving out. So that was the late 20th century. So one of the things that Brookings and George Washington, or what I do at Brookings and George Washington, is I demonstrate the viability of great movies to explain what we're doing, and also television shows. And the most important urban movie, I can prove this without numbers, I just made that up, that is Back to the Future. That it is the only movie that I know that shows the two ways of building the built environment, drivable suburban and walkable urban, in 3 different time periods. And it was written in the early 1980s. And the writers nailed it. So this first clip shows downtown Hill Valley. Downtown Hill Valley, those of you that are not in real estate, we in real estate name our communities after what we destroy to build them. So the hill is dumped into the valley, and this silly name, Hill Valley, is where this movie takes place. And so this scene opens in downtown Hill Valley in 1955 when, of course, we gray hairs, this is how we grew up. A great walkable urban place that was really quite idyllic. So this really ideal little downtown, a plaza surrounded by retail on the ground floor, office, residential up above, and a great civic use down there, and that you could get there by car, truck, bike, or skateboard, if you're Michael J. Fox, and this was the center of the universe. But even then, that the seeds of change had been planted. That back then, in 1955, this is the billboard that Marty McFly, Michael J. Fox, parked his DeLorean behind. It was a billboard advertising the subdivision to be built where he was born. So let's fast forward to 1985, downtown Hill Valley. It's a little bit different place. So, X-rated movie theaters, homeless sleeping on the street. Behind the homeless guy is the old plaza that's been paved over and turned into a surface parking lot. So now, Marty's going out to the new center of gravity in Hill Valley. And that is, if I can make this thing go forward, there we go. That is, of course, the regional mall. This is where all the activity in 1985 located. Can you turn that up just a tad? So here he's walking, he is running down this 2-lane highway, or this 2-lane access road. And of course, nobody in real life goes down that access road. There's not even a sidewalk there. And of course, you notice that it was the Lone Pine Mall. The Lone Pine Tree had to go to build the mall. But that Lone Pine Mall and the strip malls and the business parks were built at a density of, for those of you in real estate and design, it's the floor area ratio of 0.2. Very low density, which means that it had 20% coverage of the land with buildings, 80% was surface parking lots. So that was a fundamentally different form. But that's what the market wanted, and we in real estate gave it to them. Well, then the market went and changed. We moved from the industrial age to the knowledge economy, and we're moving next into the experience economy. The industrial economy is still with us. It's now 9% and falling of all jobs. But that 9% is incredibly productive. But so where are we earning our living? In the knowledge economy, which is over 50% of all jobs are in the knowledge economy. This is the creative class. And we think that the experience economy is going to layer on top of that. And both of those economies are demanding walkable urban places. Or at least they want the choice of both drivable suburban and walkable urban, depending on where you are in life. And so we began to see, and this is back when I was still a real estate consultant working for hundreds of projects per year throughout the country, we began to see that the pendulum started to swing back somewhere in the mid-90s. We started to see downtowns turn around. We started to see suburban downtowns turn around. We couldn't figure this out. Where was this coming from? And we know who to blame. It's the damn kids. It's their fault. It's the millennials driving this. And you can see this on television, that when we gray hairs grew up, it was Leave It to Beaver and Dick Van Dyke and the Brady Bunch, all set in the suburbs. Fast forward, starting with Seinfeld and Friends and Sex and the City and Two Broke Girls, all set in safe, vital, walkable urban places. Now, Hollywood does more consumer research than any business I know. They are focus group testing this thing. They are coming up with different endings. They have the Nielsen feedback instantly. This is not Hollywood pulling us by the nose in one direction. This is a reflection of what we want. And just as Dick Van Dyke and the Brady Bunch was a reflection of what our parents wanted back in the 60s and 70s. There are other reasons. The baby boomers, that if you millennials think that we baby boomers are going away, you've got another thing coming. We are never leaving. But the baby boomers, of course, have become empty nesters. We are retiring. And some, not all, are deciding to move to walkable urban places. And by the way, both the millennials and the baby boomers are also driving a major trend that we're seeing, that's probably the major trend, which is the urbanization of the suburbs. This walkable urban trend is not just the turnaround of our downtowns and our downtown adjacent places. Probably, again, 60% of the demand, say up in Washington, D.C., is the urbanization of the suburbs. It's Arlington, it's Reston Town Center, it's Bethesda, it's Silver Spring. So it's both, the walkable urban is going to the urbanizing suburbs as well as to the downtowns. So when you add up these two largest generations, you look at the demographics and they've fundamentally shifted. That when we gray hairs were growing up, 50% of all households had school-aged children in the household. 50% were singles and couples. Today, it's 25% of all households have school-aged kids. And obviously, singles and couples are the target market for walkable urbanism, though I live very close to Georgetown, and Georgetown just has this baby boom going on. On Halloween, my wife and I always go to Georgetown. It's just packed with kids going out trick-or-treating. So we're seeing the same thing throughout the country, that people can raise kids in these walkable urban places. But when you look at the future growth, as far as marginal growth of households over the next 20 years, 14% of that marginal growth is going to include children living in the household. 86% are singles and couples. The market's telling us something. As I mentioned earlier, that during the late 20th century, all we built was drivable suburban. When many of you moved here to Richmond, that if you weren't born here, that when you moved here 20, 30 years ago, you had a choice if you had a choice of where you would live. That choice was a single-family home or a single-family home. And where you would shop would be a 1980s strip mall or a 1990s strip mall. There was no choice. And we Americans get bored when we don't have choices. As I mentioned, the creative class is driving this. So south of Market in San Francisco and the meatpacking district in New York, this is where the future is being invented, and it's walkable urban. And then finally, it's just the sheer expense of owning a fleet of cars to participate in society. That when you look at how we spend on cars, on average, we spend 19% of our household income on cars. It's the second highest category of household spending. If you disaggregate the data, the drivable suburban households are spending 25% of their income on cars. Walkable urban is 9%. 16% delta is hundreds of billions of dollars per year. And for Richmond, that money leaves the local economy. It goes to Saudi Arabia and our friends in Venezuela. It goes to Detroit and Stuttgart. Very little of it stays here. We also know that there's pent-up demand because of just a vast array of consumer research that we've seen from the National Association of Realtors. My old company does a lot of this. But this is one of my favorites. It was a colleague of mine at the University of Michigan. He looked at Atlanta and Boston, what you could argue are the two bookends of metropolitan America, and found that 30-40% of us want walkable urban, 30-40% of us want drivable suburban, and 30% are agnostic. They can't make up their minds, whatever. So it's roughly, it's a 50-50 split as far as whether we're going to go walkable urban or drivable suburban. But now look at the supply side. In Boston, if 20% of the product is walkable urban, I'd be surprised. In Atlanta, it's less than 5%. So when you have, high demand and low supply, what you have is, of course, pent-up demand. And what we're seeing throughout the country, because consumer research is nice, but people don't always do what they say and what they tell the upholsterers. But the real issue is, what do they do? And we're seeing walkable urban price premiums on a price per square foot basis, anywhere from 40 to 200% on a price per square foot basis. And in fact, this is an old slide. I'm about to show you what's going on up in Metro New York, and it's pushing 400% price premiums for walkable urban versus drivable suburban. So, Back to the Future nailed this as well. So in Back to the Future 2, and by the way, don't look at Back to the Future 3, it's worthless, but Back to the Future 2, that they take you to the near distant future of downtown Hill Valley, and it's a fundamentally different place. So here he is walking into the plaza, which has now been turned from a surface parking lot back to the center of town. It's a new open space. The buildings have been all redeveloped, some torn down and built at a higher density. These writers nailed it. And they got everything right but one thing, and I think you know what that is. They always promise us flying cars. We never get flying cars. And when was that? October 21st, 2015. That any of you that in fact remember the 80s, none of us would have guessed that by 2015 we would have been bringing back our walkable urban places. We had thrown them away. Well, they're back. And this is how it's being built out in the metro area just to the north of you. Why my wife and I, we raised our kids in Santa Fe, New Mexico, because we could live any place, because the company had 6 offices, and I was in one of 6 offices. I decided to be in 0 of 6 offices and raise the kids in Santa Fe. And then after they left, we looked around and said, where should we go? And Washington just popped up, A, because I was involved with Brookings, but B, all the research showed that Washington's the model by which we're building the future of our country. And that there are more walkable urban places and more walkable urbanism in Washington than any place else. And it starts with uh, we now know that there are 8, maybe 9 different types of walkable urban places. It starts with downtown. Downtown, throughout the country, of course, are turning around, just like downtown Richmond. Then downtown adjacent places. These are places 360 degrees around downtown, like DuPont and Noma and Capitol Riverfront, and now the Wharf, that have a different character, a different economic base. They surround downtown. This is happening throughout the country, not just here, not just in. And then we have urban commercial. These are, H Street and Columbia Heights and Friendship Heights. These are places that had a regional role 50 years ago. They all went downhill economically. Now they're coming back as regionally significant walkable urban places. Then we go out to the suburbs, suburban town centers. These are places that were, farm to market kind of places back in the 18th, 19th century. They all went downhill economically, like downtown Bethesda. I'm going to show you that in just one second. And now they're all coming back because they have a great grid of streets, they have historic buildings, they have character, people want to live in them, people want to invest in them. Then the biggie is the conversion of drivable suburban places towards walkable urban. And that big red blob up there, you know that well, that's Tyson's. 2,400 acres, 48 million square feet of unmitigated traffic hell. And it is converting rapidly towards walkable urbanism. But it's a big bet. The property owners are betting on it. They're paying for much of that infrastructure themselves. It's a really, if you know a development magazine, which is put out by NAIOP, the cover story of the next issue is one that I wrote about the challenges and the progress that Tyson's is making. But the jury's out. It's a really big bet. And then finally, greenfield developments. And the granddaddy of them all, one that I worked on with Mobil Oil back in the late 80s, is Reston Town Center. That when Mobil and our company and others were coming up with the concept of a grid of streets on a greenfield site with high rises right up to the sidewalk, we took it to the urban land and we had a panel come and look at it. And the urban land developer said, "You're crazy. Only a really stupid oil company with more money than sense would build Reston Town Center." Reston Town Center from day one had 60 to 80 cent price premiums over the competition, and they absorbed twice as fast from day one. Now, introduce another concept which is called the favored quarter. The favored quarter is the place that we invested most of our real estate investment dollars in the late 20th century. And you know where the favored quarter is. There's 382 metro areas. Every one has a favored quarter. And in Washington, it's to the northwest. You know where the favored quarter is when you understand where the white upper middle income housing concentration is and where the local minority housing concentration is. Race has always dictated real estate. And in Washington, it's the white upper middle income is Montgomery County and Fairfax out to Loudoun. And the local minority population is Prince George's County, primarily black and Hispanic. So we've seen most of the drivable suburban growth go into the favored quarter. The early walkable urban growth went there too, but now we're beginning to see the expansion of the favored quarter in this new walkable urban world as we're seeing more and more economic development going to the northeast and to the southeast, into Prince George's County on the Green Line. I think it's one of the most important social equity trends of our age, bringing opportunity to low-income neighborhoods. Let me show you how it plays out on a price per square foot basis. These are the various product types in a real estate, and these are the rent premiums per square foot, anywhere from 22% higher for walkable urban versus drivable suburban to 119% higher. This also ignores, however, the cap rate premium, that walkable urbanism gets a 40-50% valuation premium. So you have to compound this. So what you're really looking at is most of the income properties are really 80 to 120% price valuation premiums. Walkable urban versus drivable suburban. We just finished doing this up in Metro New York as well. We looked at the entire metro region, 23 million people, 19 billion square feet of space, worth $6 trillion. Nobody's ever done this before. And we divided the walkable urban land and drivable suburban land, all of it. It's, by the way, Metro New York is the size of the state of Maryland. And so we dropped the land into those two categories, and we then dropped it into the two economic uses of land. Local serving, which are bedroom communities, that's on the right, and regionally significant. Those are places like where we are right now, where we make our wealth as a metropolitan region. And the interesting thing is that in Metro New York, the total land that is walkable urban is 2.5% of the total land in Metro New York is walkable urban. Obviously, Manhattan's a big chunk of that, but Jersey City and downtown Stamford, downtown Princeton, those are the walkable urban places. It's only 2.5%. The other 97.5%, that's drivable suburban, it's illegal to build walkable urban. You cannot do it legally without changing zoning laws. And what is the answer you get when you want to change the zoning law? No, over my dead body. So that's partly driving these price premiums. By the way, 53% of the gross regional product in the region is generated in that 2.5% of the land. And 55% of all real estate value is there. Now, looking at it as far as, looking at the total of those four different categories that I just showed you, you see that red bar, that the average value of a walkable urban square footage throughout the region, this is housing, office, it's a mere $750 per square foot is the value of the walkable urban. The drivable suburban is $200 per square foot. A huge price premium for walkable urban versus drivable suburban. And then the question is absorption. What are we doing? How much of this stuff are we taking down and using? That upper chart shows the absorption of office space from 2010 through the end of 2016, so 7 years of absorption of office space. 140% of the office absorption in Metro New York went to walkable urban places, to under 2.5% of the land. So how could it be 140%? Business parks are emptying out. They're not just losing market share, they're absolutely losing occupancy. One of the great questions that urban land is now asking itself throughout the country is, what the hell do we do with all these obsolete business parks? There's only so many fundamentalist churches and gymnastics organizations to fill them up, paying $1 a square foot per month. By the way, the other interesting thing up here is look at the industrial. This was the most surprising thing about New York, that with the industrial, 59% of total industrial absorption was walkable urban. This is the Brooklyn Navy Yard. This is the makerspace, artisanal manufacturing. Shocked me. I still can't believe it. 59% of industrial, which has always gone drivable suburban, low-rise, truck-oriented. Then here is how they perform. There are 300 drivable suburban places, edge cities in Metro New York, and there's 150 walkable urban places. The walkable urban is in green. The bottom of this chart is their walk score. How many of you know what walk score is? Very few. You've got to understand walk score. It's the best way of measuring walkability. And you'll see in a second why that's important to know. It's a website. You put in any address in the country, walkscore.com, any address in the country, any neighborhood, and on a 0 to 100 scale, it'll tell you how walkable or not the place is. So if you have a walk score of 5 or 10, it means you have to drive everywhere. If you have a walk score of 1 or 2, you have to drive to go to the bathroom. If you have a walk score above 70, it's a walkable urban place. Well, the green dots, the 150 walkable urban places that we identified in metropolitan New York, is obviously all on the right, above 70 walk score. The left-hand side is an index of GDP per capita and real estate valuation. It's a merged index. So this is where is the property worth most and where do we produce the most GDP per capita. And look at how that takes off as the walkable urbanism takes off. That what we're now seeing in Metro New York, for every 1 walk score increase over 70, so from 75 to 76, from 85 to 86, from 90 to 91 walk score, the value of the average real estate asset in Metro New York goes up by $20 a square foot. 1 walk score point, $20 a square foot valuation increase. Pretty significant as far as what the market's telling us. So here's where it's happening. Downtown Bethesda. You probably remember it 20 years ago. It was a pretty forgotten place. The photo in the upper left-hand side, done by B.F. Saul, those twin towers, 20 years ago, that was the famous Bob's Big Boy Drive-In, which all the Bethesda high school kids would love to go to. Those twin towers are now getting $65 a square foot in rent. Arlington, the most important urbanizing suburb. We've learned so much from Arlington. This is on Wilson Boulevard, and this shot there shows you the Sears store, closed in the mid-1980s. The Sears store is on the left. On the right is the closed garden center, and where the picture was taken is where the tire and car repair center was. This is the same photograph today from the same perspective. What you're looking at is an Apple store, Whole Foods, restaurants, $700 per square foot condos. And the interesting thing is you go 2 blocks north and south of it, it feathers back to suburbia. It's single-family housing. Those houses, 2 blocks north and 2 blocks south, are the most expensive houses in the entire county on a price per square foot basis. Why? They have the best of both worlds. They can live in suburbia and walk to 50 restaurants, the metro station, maybe walk to work. And therefore their quality of life goes up, therefore their value of their homes go up. The other thing is that the walkable urban land in Arlington represents 11% of their total land mass. Very high number. In the 1980s, in the bad old 1980s, it generated 20% of their tax base and falling for obvious reasons. As Sears was closing up, the car dealers were moving out. Today, it's 55% of their tax base. They've shifted their taxes from single-family housing to the walkable urban places. And the other thing they've done is that, the bulk of that development was housing, rental apartment, condos, and everybody say, oh my God, don't bring rental apartments. That means poor people might live there. And poor people, we don't want to educate their kids. We don't do that. And but it turns out that all that rental housing, all that condo housing, all these people moved there and then they forgot to have kids. That the school-age child generation rate of those condos is 1/8 that of the single-family housing. As a result, that the county school district, which speaks 80 different languages, is spoken in that school district. It's among the best in the country, as all those people are paying taxes but not sending their kids to school. A lot of other examples. The other fascinating thing that we learned from the county: 4-fold increase in the square footage along Wilson Boulevard over the last 20 years? The absolute car counts on Wilson Boulevard, the absolute number of cars that drive on Wilson Boulevard over the last 20 years has gone down. The entire growth has been transported there by metro, bike, walking. Go out to Denver. This is the first regional mall in Denver. It was called Via Italia. The developer must have gone to Italy and thought that putting those little arches on a regional mall would make it Italian. And obviously in the 70s, highly successful. Parking lots are jammed. By 1999, there was one department store still open. The rest of the mall went dark, which is what's going to happen to 40% of all malls in the next recession. They're going away. We all know that. And what a friend of mine did is he worked with the city to bulldoze it, put in a grid of streets, bring back a mixed-use walkable urban place, and it now gets 80% price premiums over the rest of the market, and they put a tax base under the city of Lakewood, Colorado. Here's Avalon, north of Atlanta on Georgia 400. This is a greenfield site. A friend of mine took this greenfield site, and this is old. This is at the end of phase 1. He's just completed phase 2. And just add water and poof, he has an instant rest-in-town center. Unbelievably successful. Here's down in Dallas, about 40 miles north of downtown Dallas, off of a major freeway, is this glorious little walkable urban place, Waters Creek, that just sprung up over the last 5 years, doing unbelievably well. I always like to point out in this part of the world, downtown Chattanooga. I've been working on downtown Chattanooga for 30 years, and it's just a great turnaround story of a Rust Belt town that has just revitalized itself by embracing their river, by putting in walking paths, by putting in a circulator system. It's just a remarkable turnaround. And it's not just the downtown, but it's downtown adjacent places, the university. The University of Tennessee is here, the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. It's just like what you're seeing in downtown Richmond with VCU. So I want to show you 2 more sets of numbers just to demonstrate probably where you are in this trend. Because what we found in this country is that we have leaders and we have laggards. And you're kind of a laggard, but you're moving. I mean, we can prove that, but you're not in the leadership position. That here we have 3 metro areas, Dallas, Fort Worth, Atlanta, and DC. And the walkable urban market share in 2010, as you can see, Dallas, Fort Worth was 10%, Atlanta was 16%, DC was 33%. So that's everything built for all time up until 2010. Up in DC, it was 33% of the development was walkable urban. When you look at the marginal growth from 2010 through the end of 2017, 8 years, Dallas-Fort Worth, 30% of the marginal growth is walkable urban. So that's a 3-fold increase in market share. It's gaining market share. Atlanta, 49% of all growth has been walkable urban. And Metro DC is 91% of all development is walkable urban. If you're still building drivable suburban in DC, you're probably out of business. In fact, I hate to say it, but my brother is doing just that, and he's out of business. It's painful to watch. And by the way, in Dallas-Fort Worth, 59% of all the office space in this cycle has gone to walkable urban places. And in Dallas, even they're getting somewhat reasonable, somewhat sizable price premiums, 13 to 31% price premium for walkable urban rents in office and multifamily. So what all of this means is that we have to fundamentally change how we build the built environment and the skill sets that we have to employ. I liken it to the fact that we in real estate got really good at driving NASCARs. NASCARs, you may know, go 150, 180 miles per hour and can only turn left, which is somewhat ironic given their politics. But what we now have to learn how to do is that we have to learn how to fly fighter jets, where you're going 600 miles per hour, turning right, turning left, go up 5 miles or crash and burn in seconds while you're being shot at. It's a fundamentally different way of doing business, much more complex. But the upsides can be remarkable. And one of the things that we found in walkable urban development, unlike drivable suburban, is as you add more to a place, it just gets better. There's an upward spiral of value creation. That next restaurant that opens up next to your apartment building, and the second restaurant that opens up next to the first restaurant, puts more people on the street. There's more activity, it's safer, there's more people watching. Your property goes up in value, your property taxes go up in value. It's just this remarkable upward spiral. When I've done 17 different real estate development projects, all walkable urban, and all of them, we of course help our competitors across the street. We'll give you our market studies, we'll introduce you to the city, we'll help you get moving, because by their going forward successfully, even if it's in direct competition with us, we'll do better. It's this more is better with walkable urbanism. Now, no such thing as a free lunch. We have a massive affordable housing problem. And I could spend another hour talking about that. The issue is, and I'm going to go through this real fast, is the skill sets that you have here need to be re-engineered. That if you have great drivable suburban skill sets and apply them to walkable urban, you'll fail. From a site acquisition point of view, from a construction point of view, from an underwriting point of view, from a capital stack point of view, from an investment point of view, from a management point of view. It's fundamentally different, and I'm not going to go through this, but it's all the complete opposite of drivable suburban. So what about you here? What are you about to embark on in a few weeks? Because this is significant for the future of your region and the future of real estate investment. This 7.6 miles, $65 million bus rapid transit system, one of the first in the US, but we're laggards in BRT. We're seeing BRT throughout the world successfully being deployed. And again, keep in mind that we're looking at the economic development of these things. That's why you build these things. You don't build these things to move people. And particularly what you've been doing with your bus system is you've been building your bus system to move poor people. That the BRT will be successful when you all in this audience take it as a mode of choice, because it's better, faster, cheaper. And you've got 15 stations. My sense, and again, I've been involved with this for the last 5 years, working with your city, that if I were you from a site selection point of view, I'd be looking around VCU in the middle of Broad Street. Probably and the smaller projects are going to go to the south, and there's going to be some major projects going to the north of Broad Street because there's some major industrial land that can be converted. And that would be number one where I would look. And number two would be on the east side, Rockets Landing. And these are, I think, the places that are going to see the most appreciation. We all know what business is all about: buy low, sell high. And my sense is that these two areas of the BRT is where you want to be looking. You're not going to see much to the west because it gets super drivable suburban, and the property owners, Federal Realty owns the strip mall where it terminates. And while Federal Realty is a great walkable urban developer, that's only a small part of the company. The mainstream strip mall owners that are part of Federal Realty don't have a clue. And that strip mall out there is going to stay a strip mall for many years. So we don't see much on the west. And downtown, there'll certainly be some movement downtown, but of course it's already highly built out. It's not that it won't see more, but you won't see the kind of price appreciation we think will in fact occur to the east and to the west. So the best place to learn about BRT in this country is a town that you probably would never think you would be a model, but of all places, Cleveland. They've put in the Health Line, going from downtown out to the universities to the east and to the and out to the medical center. And it's been open 5 years. $5.5 billion of new investment has gone along Euclid Boulevard, which is where that BRT line goes. So just in closing, over the last 20, 30 years, we've been thinking about walkable urbanism as a niche market. Well, we now are finding it is the market. Thank you very much.